The pounding started without warning. 3 sharp strikes against weathered wood, each one more desperate than the last. Emma Hartley froze, her hand darting toward her father's rifle leaning behind the pantry door. Trust your instincts, never your hope. Then came the voice, rough and fractured by wind. "Please, ma'am, they're dying out here." She crept to the door, shotgun gripped tight, and cracked it open. A wall of snow rushed inside. Through the swirling white stood a figure, tall and broad-shouldered, ice crusting his military jacket like armor. In his arms, wrapped in a soaked blanket, 2 shapes trembled. Puppies, German shepherds, barely days old.
At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every heartwarming story, whether between humans or their animal companion, deserves to be told and heard. If you agree, please share and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words.
Emma's breath caught, a sharp ache spreading beneath her ribs. The man's lips had gone pale, his breath coming in shallow clouds, but his grip on those pups never wavered. His steel blue eyes held hers, unnervingly calm as the snow swirled around him. The air in the house felt heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. She'd learned to trust these feelings, so when the knocking came, some part of her had been waiting. "The barn," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "There's dry hay in the back corner. It'll keep you through the night." The stranger nodded, gratitude flickering across his weathered face. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll be gone at first light." His voice carried the texture of gravel and exhaustion. Emma watched him disappear into the white curtain of snow, the lantern she'd given him swallowed within seconds. The door closed with a heavy thud. She tried to settle back into routine, made fresh tea, stoked the fire. But every few minutes, a sound pierced the storm's roar. A soft whimper threaded through the wind like a plea. The puppies, crying, freezing. This is foolish, she told herself, even as she pulled on her heavy coat. But her hands were already grabbing the lantern. The cold slammed into her like a physical blow. Snow reached her knees, wind tearing at her coat. By the time she reached the barn, her lungs burned. She yanked the door open. The stranger sat against the far wall, his jacket wrapped around the puppies. His lips had gone from pale to blue, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Yet his arms never loosened their protective hold. When he looked up and saw Emma, surprise flickered in those calm eyes. Not fear, but something like shame. "They'll make it till dawn," he said quietly, his words slurring from the code. Emma took 3 steps forward. "Not if you freeze first." She extended her arms, and after a long moment, he surrendered the bundle carefully. The puppies stirred weakly, one releasing a tiny sigh. "Come on," Emma said, turning toward the house. The stranger hesitated. "Ma'am, I can't." "You can and you will," she interrupted. "I didn't drag myself through this storm to watch you die of stubbornness in my barn." The warmth of the house hit them like a wall. Emma laid the puppies on a folded quilt near the wood stove, rubbing their small bodies gently with a towel. Their fur began to dry in soft tufts. One was black and tan, the other a lighter golden brown. They nestled together, tiny noses touching, and their breathing gradually deepened. Behind her, the stranger stood dripping melted snow onto the floor. He was tall, with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent years standing at attention. "Sit," Emma said without looking at him. "You're making a puddle." He obeyed silently, lowering himself onto the braided rug near the fire. For several minutes, neither spoke. The flames crackled and danced. The puppies, now dry and wrapped in wool, began to breathe easier. Finally, the man spoke. "Name's Lucas Brennan. Former Marine. His voice was low, careful. Emma glanced at him briefly. Former, she echoed softly, hearing the weight that single word carried. He gave a short nod, as if that explained everything. They didn't speak again after that. The fire provided its own conversation. Emma sat at the table, watching this stranger and the two tiny lives sleeping beside him. For years, this house had known only her footsteps, her breathing, her solitude. Now it held something else entirely, a heartbeat not her own. As Lucas drifted into restless sleep, one hand still resting protectively on the blanket, Emma realized something had shifted. For the first time in 3 long winters, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Outside, the storm raged on. But as the fire crackled and the stranger slept, Emma couldn't shake one question. What kind of man risks his life for 2 puppies in a killing storm? Dawn bled pale light over a valley buried under silence and diamond-bright snow. The blizzard had passed. Emma Hartley stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, trading her nighttime shawl for a worn flannel shirt that had once belonged to her father. The coffee pot percolated softly, filling the kitchen with rich, dark warmth. Last night's events clung to her like morning fog. Her house no longer felt quite as empty, and that realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She heard him before she saw him. Boots on the porch, steady and rhythmic, the sound of purpose. Lucas Brennan had risen before sunrise. When Emma opened the door, he was already clearing the steps, pushing packed snow aside with an old shovel he'd found by the shed. His jacket hung open despite the freezing air, revealing a faded green thermal shirt beneath. Steam rose from his breath in thick clouds. His movements were precise, economical, each motion serving a purpose. When he noticed Emma watching, he gave a brief nod. Figured you didn't need your porch frozen shut. His voice sounded hoarse, rougher than last night. Emma studied him for a moment. Even exhausted, even doing simple labor, he carried himself with military bearing. But there was something else, too. His eyes, when they met hers, held the hollowed-out look of a man scanning an empty horizon. "Come inside," she said, stepping aside. "Coffee's ready." The smell of wood smoke and fresh brew greeted him as he entered. Near the fire, the 2 puppies slept on their folded quilt, fur now dry and gleaming. One stirred at the sound of footsteps, giving a tiny yawn that sounded more like a squeak. Lucas crouched beside them, and Emma watched his face transform. The hard lines softened, the soldier's mask slipping. "They're survivors," he said quietly, letting one small paw rest against his calloused finger. "Didn't think they'd make it through the night, but they're tougher than they look." Emma poured 2 cups of coffee, the ceramic warm against her palms. "You kept them warm, fed them right. I did the same for a newborn colt last spring when his mother died. Small sips of warm milk, body heat, patience. He lived." Lucas nodded, his finger gently tracing a scar on the darker pup's ear, a thin white line like a stitch. "Some marks you don't choose," he said, almost to himself. "What do we call them?" he asked. The question caught Emma off guard. "We." She hesitated. "Midnight," she said finally, pointing to the black and tan pup. "He's the quiet one, steady and watchful." She gestured to the lighter one. "And Ranger for this one. He's already trying to explore, brave and restless." Lucas repeated the name softly. Midnight and Ranger. The first true smile she'd seen touched his eyes before it reached his lips, softening the scar on his jaw. "They'll do just fine." After breakfast, Lucas insisted on working. Emma protested, said he'd done enough, but he'd already found the axe leaning against the back wall. From the kitchen window, she watched him split logs with the same precision he'd shown with everything else. The rhythm echoed across the frozen yard, steady as a heartbeat. He worked without rushing, never wasting a movement, his jacket open again despite the cold. She wondered how long he'd been drifting like this, moving from place to place, storm to storm, always helping, never staying. By midday, he'd stacked enough firewood to last 2 weeks. When he came back inside, his beard was dusted white with snow, his cheeks flushed red from exertion. He poured himself water from the tin pitcher and stood near the fire, rubbing his hands together. The puppies woke at the warmth and scrambled toward him on clumsy legs, tails wagging for the first time. Lucas smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Guess we should get used to having them around," he said. But Emma heard what he wasn't saying. "I should get used to being here." The next day blurred into the one after, then the one after that. Lucas asked if he could stay until the roads cleared. Emma agreed, telling herself it was practical, that she needed the help with repairs. He moved into the small storage room attached to the barn, fixing its broken door before sleeping there the first night. By the third morning, the sound of tools and boots had woven itself into the fabric of the ranch's daily rhythm. Lucas patched the barn roof, replaced broken fence rails, and repaired the water pump. Emma found herself listening for him throughout the day. The rasp of a saw, the crunch of boots in snow, the low rumble of his voice when he spoke to Midnight and Ranger. The puppies thrived under his constant care, following him everywhere. Ranger was the bold one, always first to investigate new sounds, while Midnight preferred to stay close, eyes tracking Lucas's every movement. When evening came, Lucas would carry both pups inside, tucking them near the fire with tenderness. Emma often watched from the table, pretending to read while observing the quiet gentleness in his scarred hands. Something was changing in the house's atmosphere. The silence that once pressed down like physical weight now moved lighter, easier. The kitchen smelled of morning coffee. The evenings carried the scent of leather oil and wood smoke when Lucas came in from outside. Emma talked more than she had in years, not much, but enough to surprise herself. She told him about the ranch's history, how her father used to sing old folk songs, how her mother baked bread every Sunday. Lucas listened from the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable, but attention complete. When he shared pieces of his own story, the fragments came slowly. 12 years in the Marines, lost half his unit in an ambush. The sound of gunfire still woke him some nights. On the 6th day, weak sunlight broke through the clouds. The storm's grip had finally loosened. Lucas stood by the corral with Midnight and Ranger circling his boots. Emma walked up beside him, hands buried deep in her coat pockets. The mountains rose sharp against the horizon. "Weather's clearing," she observed. "Road might open by next week." Lucas nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the distant peaks. "Maybe," he said, the word carrying doubt. That night, Emma said 2 places at the table without thinking. When Lucas sat down, he noticed but said nothing. They ate in companionable quiet. Midnight and Ranger dozed near their feet. After dinner, Lucas fixed the loose window latch Emma had ignored for months, then stood by the fire, absently rubbing his left shoulder. "Does it hurt?" Emma asked. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the flames. "Cold gets into old wounds, that's all it is." But Emma knew it wasn't just the cold. She recognized pain that lived deeper than muscle and bone. Before bed, Emma stepped onto the porch. The moon had returned, sharp and silver above the snowfields. Through the window, she could see Lucas lying on the rug near the fire. The dogs curled close, his breathing deep and even. For the first time in 3 years, the house looked like more than just a building. It looked like home. But 15 miles away, in a cramped office above the hardware store, 2 men sat studying a yellow document by lamplight. Dale and Raymond Kohler, Emma's cousins, had always believed the Hartley ranch should have been theirs. They'd found what they were looking for, a clause in Emma's father's will. Raymond leaned back in his chair. "She's got that soldier living out there now. Folks say he's trouble. Wouldn't take much to prove she's not fit to run that place alone. Silver Creek's got laws for situations like this." Dale frowned. "You sure you want to start that kind of talk?" Raymond grinned, thin and cold as winter ice. "Talk's already started, brother. I'm just giving it a place to land where it counts." By morning, a letter had been drafted to the county clerk's office. Emma didn't know it yet, but trouble was walking the same road home, only this trouble carried legal papers and the weight of greed dressed up as family concern. And in that cramped office, Raymond Kohler smoothed the yellowed will with a grin thin and cold as a razor. Time to remind her who this land really belongs to. Snow fell thick enough to hush the world, wrapping the Hartley ranch in a cold, white silence. By noon, everything was monochrome. Emma stood by the window, fingers resting against frost-fogged glass, watching Lucas work in the yard. He was shoveling the path again, coat collar turned high, breath curling into the air. Midnight and Ranger darted between his boots, barking at the shovel each time it struck snow, their tails wagging with stubborn joy. The rhythm of his work had become part of her life now, but that day, something off-key waited beyond the snow. By mid-afternoon, the crunch of wagon wheels broke through the hush. Emma's chest tightened before she even saw them. 2 horses, 3 men. Dale and Raymond Kohler, her mother's nephews, rode up with a stranger seated between them. Emma stepped onto the porch, coat thrown over her shoulders. She didn't need introductions to know trouble had arrived wearing family faces. Raymond dismounted first, moving with the lean confidence of a man who mistook cruelty for cleverness. His slick dark hair was perfectly combed. Dale followed, heavier and slower, his eyes flicking between his brother and Emma. The third man, a lawyer by the cut of his coat, climbed down carefully, adjusting wire-rimmed spectacles. Howard Bennett, a clerk from Helena. "Afternoon, Emma," Raymond said, pulling off his gloves. His smile was narrow and cold. "Hate to bother you in this fine weather, but we've got business that won't wait till spring." Emma's voice came steady. "If it's business, it can wait. Storm's coming." Raymond chuckled. "This kind of storm I'd ride through twice." He glanced past her toward the house, and his smirk deepened when he saw Lucas through the window. "Seems you've got company these days. Heard you've been keeping a drifter warm." Emma didn't flinch. "You rode all this way to gossip, Raymond?" Dale shifted uneasily, but Raymond ignored him, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. "Not gossip, law." He held up the papers. "This here's your father's will, the original copy. According to this, your right to keep this land depends on your ability to maintain it properly. And if you're found unfit or remain unmarried, management can revert to family trusteeship, which would be us." A cold void opened in Emma's stomach, as if the floor had dropped away. "You can't be serious. That clause hasn't been enforced in 20 years. "Doesn't mean it's not valid," Raymond replied smoothly. He handed the papers to Bennett, who stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley," the lawyer said, his voice as dry as the paper he held, "the clause is not a relic. It is a living restraint." Lucas's voice came from behind her, calm but carrying quiet steel. "You should leave." He stood in the doorway, snow melting on his coat, shoulders squared. Raymond looked him over. "And you are?" "Lucas Brennan," he said simply, his tone flat, military. Raymond smirked. "Ah, the soldier. Folks in town say you've made yourself right at home here. That true?" Lucas's eyes didn't waver. "I fix what's broken, that's all." Raymond's grin widened. "Well, if fixing is what you're good at, you might start with the paperwork. Seems the lady's in need of a man's signature to keep her land. Maybe that's what brought you here for, some kind of arrangement." Before Emma could speak, Lucas stepped forward, his voice dropping lower. "You'll keep her name out of your mouth." For a heartbeat, the only sound was wind whispering between them. Dale cleared his throat. "We didn't come for a fight, Brennan, just following the law." "Then you've had your say," Lucas replied. "Now leave before the weather turns worse." Raymond smoothed his coat. "You've got 1 week, Emma. We'll be back then, And either that clause is settled properly or the county takes notice. Would be a shame to see the Hartley place go to ruin over stubbornness." He tipped his hat mockingly, then turned to mount his horse. "Enjoy your soldier while you can." The three men rode off, their wagon carving hard lines through the white field until they vanished. Emma stood frozen on the porch, the papers clutched in her hands. Lucas stepped beside her but didn't speak. She could feel his warmth through the coat. After a moment, she said quietly, "They can't take it. My father left this to me. I've kept it running. I've paid every tax, every debt." "They'll use what they can," Lucas said, his voice even. "Doesn't matter what's fair, only what's written on paper." Emma swallowed hard. "I won't let them have it. I can't." "I know." He looked out across the field. "Then we fight the way we can." Then, with the next few days, Silver Creek buzzed with the story. The widow Hartley, the ex-Marine, the land dispute, it was all anyone talked about. Neither Emma nor Lucas spoke to defend themselves. The truth was smaller, quieter, carried in the way Lucas worked harder each morning and the way Emma brought him coffee without asking. The bond between them deepened, unspoken but solid. Some nights after chores, they sat by the fire, the dogs curled between their boots. Lucas would oil the old rifle or mend leather straps while Emma patched work shirts by lamplight. They didn't fill the silence anymore. They just let it be. Sometimes she'd glance up and find his eyes already on her, steady and unflinching. Once, when the pups clambered into her lap, she laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. Lucas smiled then, small but genuine. On the seventh night, wind rose again, shaking the shutters. Emma stood by the window watching snowflakes drift against the glass. Lucas sat at the table writing something in a small, worn notebook. The dog slept near the fire. When he noticed her watching, he closed the book quietly. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "If this land is what keeps you here, what your father built, you shouldn't have to lose it because of someone else's greed." She turned, heart quickening. "What are you saying?" He met her gaze directly. "There's a way to stop them. You said the clause was about being unfit or unmarried. If marriage settles it—" "Lucas," she cut in, her voice soft but sharp, "you don't have to say that. You don't owe me anything." "I'm not saying it because I owe you," he said quietly. "I'm saying it because I want to." The fire crackle faded to nothing. The only sound was the soft tap of snow against the glass and the ragged whisper of her own breath. Emma searched his face, the calm steadiness there, the faint shadow of sorrow, and found no trace of pity or obligation. Only sincerity, only truth. The scent of wood smoke and cold wool filled the space between them. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Her eyes met his and held. Lucas nodded once, as if hearing her silence loud and clear, and turned back to face the fire. The promise hung between them, not sealed by spoken words, but by the warmth that reached across the cold room. The morning of the hearing dawned brittle and gray. Frost spidered across the windows. Emma stood by the stove in her best dress, dark wool, simple. She buttoned the last clasp with hands steadier than she felt. Her hair was coiled into a neat bun. In the small mirror, she looked older, but there was stillness in her eyes, resolve. Lucas waited outside, already dressed in a clean flannel shirt and the same brown coat. He'd shaved that morning. He looked up as Emma stepped out. The pups watched from the doorway, tails wagging. "You ready?" Lucas asked quietly. Emma nodded once. "As I'll ever be." They hitched the wagon and rode toward Silver Creek. The town was already awake. People gathered along the street, whispering as the wagon passed. Some nodded, others turned away. The courthouse was a modest brick building. Inside, it smelled of dust, old ink, and wood polish. Emma and Lucas walked through those doors side by side, neither looking back. Behind them, the puppies barked once from the wagon. And ahead, beyond the heavy courthouse doors, waited judgment, justice, and a battle for everything they had both learned to call home. Judge William Garrett settled onto the bench, a movement as slow and final as a mountain coming to rest. He was a broad man in his late 50s, with iron gray hair and a face weathered by decades on the Montana plains. His pale eyes, sharp as winter frost, moved between the two sides of the room with careful attention. At one table sat Raymond and Dale Kohler, dressed as though virtue could be purchased with starch and black wool. Between them, Howard Bennett shuffled papers. On the other side, Emma stood beside Lucas, her chin lifted, spine straight. Behind them, Margaret Foster sat wrapped in her blue scarf, her lips pressed tight. The bailiff called for order. Howard Bennett rose first, his voice dry and reedy. "Your Honor, we come before the court to address the matter of the Hartley estate. We contend that Miss Hartley has failed to demonstrate competent stewardship and that the property should revert to the Kohler family as next of kin." Raymond leaned back with a smirk. Emma's pulse pounded, but her voice was clear as mountain water. "Your Honor, I've kept this ranch running through 3 winters alone. The books are here." She placed the worn ledgers on the table. "Feed purchased, livestock counted, taxes paid on time. You'll find no debt, no neglect." Judge Garrett flipped through the pages. "Seems in order," he murmured, looking at Bennett. "What evidence do you have to the contrary, Mr. Bennett?" The lawyer hesitated. "Only that the property has been misused, specifically sheltering unrelated individuals without proper contract, a man residing there without legal standing." Every gaze turned toward Lucas. The air tightened. Lucas rose, the scrape of his chair the only sound in the still room. "That man would be me, Your Honor. My name is Lucas Brennan. I'm a former United States Marine. I came here during the storm that nearly took my life and 2 others." He nodded toward Midnight and Ranger, who slept in a basket by the bench. "I stayed because there was work that needed doing. The fences were failing, the barn roof was near gone, the water pump broken. She was doing the work of 3 men by herself." He paused, glancing at Emma. "I didn't stay for charity. I stayed because it was a place worth keeping alive and a person worth standing beside." Raymond snorted. "A touching speech, soldier, but you fixing darns doesn't make her fit to own land independently. That's the law." Lucas met his gaze without blinking. "No, but it proves she's not alone in keeping it standing. And that's more than I can say for men who tear down what others build." Judge Garrett lifted a hand. "That's enough." He studied Lucas. "You served in the Marines?" "Yes, sir. 12 years, honorably discharged." "Then you know discipline. You understand that truth isn't always what's written on paper, but what shows itself in action." Garrett turned back to Emma. "Miss Hartley, is this man employed by you in any formal capacity?" "No, Your Honor," Emma said clearly. "He works beside me, not for me. There's a difference." Raymond leaned forward. "So you admit it. He's living there without agreement. That's irregular. It proves exactly what we've been saying, that Miss Hartley lacks the judgment necessary for proper land stewardship." Emma's composure didn't waver. "What's unlawful about kindness? My father used to say that as long as someone still cares for the soil, still fights for it, it belongs to them. I care for that land, Your Honor, every single day, through drought, through storm, through gossip and greed. You've seen the records. You've heard about the work. That's all I can give you, the truth." The room fell still. Judge Garrett leaned back, hands steepled. After a long moment, he spoke quietly but firmly. "This court has reviewed the evidence. The financial records show consistent, competent management. The testimony reveals dedication. The clause in question was designed to prevent neglect, not to punish independence or penalize acts of human decency." He looked directly at Raymond and Dale. The attempt to invoke this clause appears motivated not by genuine concern, but by personal interest. That is not the spirit in which such laws were written. Then he struck the gavel once. The court finds Miss Emma Hartley competent and lawful owner of the Hartley Ranch. The clause is satisfied. Case dismissed. A breath Emma didn't know she was holding rushed out. The tight coil of wire that had been her spine for weeks finally loosened. Margaret dabbed her eyes. Several others in the gallery nodded. Dale slumped in his seat. But Raymond's expression curdled into something ugly. He gathered his papers without looking at anyone and left, his boots thudding against the floorboards. Bennett followed quickly. Dale lingered for a moment, meeting Emma's eyes briefly before he turned and walked out. Lucas turned to Emma, his voice low. "It's over." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "For now," she said, "but I think we just won more than a case." Outside, snowflakes drifted from a sky washed pale blue. The air smelled of pine and cold metal. Lucas stood beside Emma on the courthouse steps, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled slightly. Margaret approached, wrapping Emma in a fierce hug. "I knew you'd stand. Your father would be proud." Emma smiled, tears threatening but not quite falling. "Thank you for coming, Margaret." The older woman patted Lucas's arm. "You take care of her, you hear?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am." As they walked to the wagon, Midnight and Ranger greeted them with enthusiastic barking. Emma laughed, bending to scratch their ears. Lucas lifted both pups into the wagon bed, then helped Emma up to the seat. They rode back through Silver Creek as the afternoon light turned golden. People watched from windows. Some even nodded respectfully as the wagon passed. The victory was small, but it felt enormous. It meant the ranch would stay in her hands. It meant the work they'd done together hadn't been for nothing. It meant they could keep building whatever this was between them. As they left town behind, the mountains rose ahead, dark purple against the fading sky. The ranch waited beyond those peaks, a place where two people and two dogs had learned to become something more. But even as peace seemed to settle, neither Emma nor Lucas noticed the single rider watching from the ridge above town. Raymond Kohler sat motionless on his horse, his face dark with rage. He watched until the wagon disappeared, then turned his horse and rode east, toward the rougher parts of the territory, toward men who didn't care about laws or judges, toward men who solved problems with kerosene and gunpowder, not paperwork. It began with the wind turning sharp and wrong. The evening was calm after the courthouse victory, the sky bruised with dusk. Emma finished supper while Lucas oiled the old rifle by the fire. He stood suddenly, head tilted. "Hear that?" Emma paused. "Wind." He shook his head once. Engines, multiple. A low growl cut through the cold air. Then headlights, 3 sets crawling along the ridge, yellow beams fractured by fog and darkness. Old trucks, heavy and unhurried. Emma's stomach turned to ice. Lucas set the rifle down beside the door, his jaw tightening. He recognized that sound. When the truck stopped at the gate, the wind carried coarse voices, the slam of doors, then something else. The glint of red bandanas tied around necks and arms. Red bandanas, a mark from a past Lucas had buried. One of those men, Derek Kane, had betrayed his unit. Seeing those bandanas felt like the past refusing to stay dead. Emma came to his side. "Who are they?" "People who shouldn't be here," Lucas said, his voice low. "Stay inside, lock the back door." "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. He met her eyes. "Then stay behind me and do exactly what I say." The men moved closer, 4 of them, rough-faced. One was tall and broad with a crooked nose and a long leather coat. Garrett Cross. His dark hair hung to his collar and a scar cut across his cheek. He raised a hand in mock greeting. "Evening, Miss Hartley. Heard you got yourself a hero up here. Marine man, right? Thought we'd stop by, pay our respects." His grin showed a missing tooth. See, our friend Lucas here owes us a little something from his past. Thought we'd come collect. Emma's grip tightened on the door. You've made a mistake. There's nothing for you here. Cross's eyes flicked toward her. There's always something, lady. Ain't that right, Brennan? Lucas stepped onto the porch, the rifle steady. You boys rode a long way for a mistake. Turn around and keep riding while you still can. Cross laughed. Oh, we're just here to talk. Maybe take a look around. Maybe light a fire or two to keep warm. One of the men by the truck tossed something, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck, fire trailing. It shattered against the barn door. Flames leapt upward, orange and roaring. The puppies barked wildly from inside the barn. Emma screamed their names and bolted forward, but Lucas caught her wrist. No, you'll burn. Then we both go, she shot back and tore free. Lucas cursed and followed. Inside the barn, blast furnace heat sucked the air from her lungs, and smoke stung her eyes to instant tears. The air was thick, hay crackling underfoot. She found the pups huddled near the water trough, whimpering. Lucas grabbed a bucket, dousing the doorway just enough to create a path. They stumbled out as the roof began to cave inward with a sound like thunder. Outside, the fire threw monstrous light across the snow. The men moved closer, silhouettes against the blaze. Garrett Cross drew a pistol. Lucas raised his rifle. Leave now, or I'll make you regret staying. Cross sneered. Still the soldier, still thinking you can save what's already burning. The next seconds blurred. Lucas fired first. One man fell. The other scattered, firing back. Emma ducked behind the water trough, clutching the pups. Lucas moved swift and precise. One man lunged, and Lucas met him halfway, the rifle butt cracking against bone. Cross fired twice more, the shots going wide. Then a shout came from the road. Drop your weapons, now! Sheriff Thomas Crane's voice boomed across the yard. Red and blue lights cut through the smoke. The sheriff and two deputies charged forward, rifles raised. Crane was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-bearded, his badge glinting. His men spread out. The attackers dropped their guns, hands raised. Crane's gaze swept from Lucas to Emma to the burning barn. Hell of a night, he barked orders. Cuff 'em, all of 'em. The flames were nearly out, reduced to black smoke curling into the dawn. Lucas stood breathing hard. Emma stepped beside him, soot streaking her cheeks, the pups trembling but alive in her arms. He looked at her, at this woman who had run into fire, and something inside him softened. As dawn broke, the snow turned pink and gray with ash. The barn was half gone, but the rest stood. The house stood. They stood. Sheriff Crane loaded the captured men into his truck. Cross's glare burned through the bars, a promise of unfinished vengeance. Lucas turned back toward the house. You should have stayed inside where it was safe. Emma met his eyes steadily. And let you fight alone? That's not how this works anymore. He smiled faintly. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. You knew that when you decided to stay, she said softly. The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding. Lucas built a new barn with his own hands. The townspeople came to help, bringing lumber, food, and friendship. The barn rose again, stronger than before. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted, grass returned, the fields bloomed. Midnight and Ranger grew into strong young dogs, their coats thick and glossy. They bounded across the yard each morning, their barks echoing like joy. One morning, when the last frost melted and the sun rose warm, Lucas stepped outside early. The dawn painted the world in pink and silver. Emma joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter. He turned to her, eyes clear and steady. I'm not going anywhere. This is home now. You are home. She looked at him, a genuine smile reaching her eyes. It already was. From the moment you knocked on that door, it already was. The sun rose fully, spilling gold over the plains and mountains, over the rebuilt barn and the sturdy house, over two people who had found each other in a storm. Midnight and Ranger bounded across the yard, barking at the sky. How miracles are often quiet, a knock in a storm, a stranger who stays, a life rebuilt from ashes. May this story remind you that faith isn't only for churches, but for moments when you choose kindness over fear, when you keep standing even when the wind howls hardest, when you open your door to someone in need and discover you were the one being rescued all along.
If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.